In this chapter, we're going to be looking at physical access attacks, lockpicking, Metasploit project, Saint exploit, and core impact. Looking at exploits, a common term for the computer security community that refers to malicious computer attacks that take advantage of your vulnerabilities, your bugs, glitches, security holes, and they could actually lead to some sort of compromise. That is why we see in Microsoft Windows especially, we're always patching, because Microsoft Windows operating systems are such a popular target because they exist. And if you're going to be a hacker and you're wanting to cause harm to people, it would make sense that perhaps the more popular operating system would be the one to, harm and put your effort into, versus you will sometimes hear people that have Apple computers, MacBooks and such, say that they don't have these problems, but do realize they're not quite as popular in the marketplace as the Windows, and there are problems, there are vulnerabilities with every system. Windows, Linux, Macintosh, any of those. So there can be exploits on any of these different types of systems. And we still, have to think about keeping our systems secure and realize that vulnerabilities are always being discovered, and that's why it's so important, of course, for patching. Now, exploits can also be classified by the type of vulnerability they attack. There's different types of vulnerabilities. They're kind of showing you ones we've already discussed. The buffer overflows, format string, race conditions, cross-site scripting on web pages. And the idea of these exploits is to give you the highest access you can get to the computer, which in the Linux world we would call that root. In the Windows world, we might call it admin or administrator. So there can be one exploit which gets you a certain point, and then another exploit, and so on, and eventually you may find yourself at the root level, or maybe you get lucky and find an exploit that gets you there rather quickly. The Black Hat hackers do not publish their exploits, but keep them private to themselves or other malicious hackers. And when you hear about a new attack that there is no fix for, we call that a zero-day attack. And with these, we get these attacks that are brand new, 0 day, and then the vendors have to come up with the fix for those. Now also realize there are available exploits that you can get to even for the people that aren't quite so skilled, and these are called script kiddies. Physical access attacks. Now, physical security is a big part of our protection. Sometimes we think simply from the idea, is it patched? Do you have your firewall blocking what you need to block? And so on. But again, this kind of leads us into lockpicking a bit, realizing that physical security is super critical, keeping us safe. Now, as far as what do we do, maybe we just lock the door. Maybe we have layers of security. We have people that act as guards. Maybe they're even armed, like on military bases. And as we discussed earlier, social engineering, like Kevin Mitnick did and discussed in his book, Art of Deception. Hackers can use that, work in the human element. And if they were to act as if they were there to take care of some work, I'm a fire inspector, or I need to there's something wrong with your phone system, we've been getting some errors, I'm here to fix that. They might find themselves in areas that when they were lit back there to take care of the fire inspection, for example, perhaps it could go further and pick your locks. There's also dumpster diving, dumpstering, binning, trashing, garbing, and so on. But the idea, as you can see in the picture, of what someone has thrown away that may not have been shredded, and there could be information on what operating systems you run, what type of computers, who are the personnel within the company, which could help with the social engineering attack. Now these slides right here and forward for a little while are going to be talking about lockpicking. And it's not like it's just like, this is so easy. Some lockpicking is easier than others, but there's so many different methods, and it's something that you can become more and more skilled with. And of course, consult the laws when it comes to going around with lock-picking equipment if we're not actually, allowed to be doing that because our occupation requires it. So in some areas, carrying lock-picking equipment could be potentially illegal. So I would definitely double check on that. But beyond that, just kind of going over some of the different tools that are used for lock-picking. Talking about torque wrench, used to apply turning pressure to the lock. Going to look through some of these, and then I'm going to take you to some websites to look at lock picking. Also, what we think of as just picks to manipulate the pins, and there's different types here, different raking, basically raking mechanisms. You rake it across the pins. Snap gun, basically physics of shock to separate the internal pins. Used by FBI, CIA, SWAT, and so on, law enforcement. Electric pick. And this part here, beyond the tools, is just simply showing how the different types of locks work. And if you had some locks to play with, that would be really good from an educational perspective to kind of play with the lock picking equipment. And then one might ask, what in the world does this have to do with this subject? Well, if you become a vulnerability assessor, penetration tester, you're basically an ethical hacker. And we can accept pretty easily that we would learn to pose as a hacker and do what a hacker would do. And that might be cracking passwords, running exploits, breaking into systems. But what about the social engineering part? And you use social engineering to pretend, again, that you're the fire inspector. And then you continue on. If you're simulating this bad guy, then you can go in there and see how far you can get and try to get past the locked doors. And then you being hired as someone to do this sort of ethical hacking or penetration testing of the physical security, it might reveal that their locks are substandard and it would be easy enough to pick those locks. And then the company would have to reevaluate their physical security. So a person involved in vulnerability assessments and penetration testing goes well beyond just simply the computer tactics of the cracking the passwords and the breaking into the system through exploits. They start looking at trying to evaluate physical security as well. So becoming skilled at this would be quite helpful. So basically, it would be really nice if you could play with various locks again and realize that this could prepare you if you happen to get into vulnerability and penetration testing. And these slides are just essentially showing some of the different types of locks that are out there, and some of the mechanisms inside the lock, the pins, the plugs, the sideboards, and so on. Just a variety of different types of methods trying to pick these locks. You can kind of see the key going in and the plug, and then trying to essentially pick the lock. So essentially, in order to understand the feel of lockpicking, you need to know how the movement of the binding pin is affected by the torque that's applied by your wrench and the pressure applied by your pick. And the binding torque is caused by the friction of the pin against that cylinder, the hole, and the spring. And when the pressure of the pick exceeds the friction, the pin will raise into the hole. Now, going a little further, take you over to browser. I want to show you that there are a whole lot of, I tried to avoid the videos for this demonstration, but effectively there are a lot of videos on lockpicking. These have some animations, but effectively just kind of give us a step-by-step on picking locks. And it's not necessarily that this lock picking is all for unethical purposes, and our situation here is to look at ethical usages of picking locks, as well as it might be a situation of your own where you've lost your keys. You never know. They're showing the pin and tumbler. You can see the key going in, understanding how the lock works. Also talking about a pick and tension wrench. Okay, it's kind of neat to look through is all. So I'm just kind of showing you what's freely available on the internet that can kind of teach information about lockpicking if you have an interest or you think this could be your career path. As far as ethical hacking, better known as penetration testing for the security people's networks. They want to know where they stand. And we call this not black hat, but white hat. You're an ethical type hacker. Okay, so these are kind of nice to look at. I'm not going to really study these. And here is more. This one shows you some different lock diagrams and animations that you could study, where you can understand. Here they're showing how they can actually rake the pins for lock picking there. There are some locks that are actually pick resistant, or basically it was harder to manipulate. Now what's interesting here is just kind of for fun. They actually have lots of videos and instructions on how to open up these padlocks, combination locks, with a Coke can. And again, you can see step by step a little bit better if you look at some YouTube videos. And you're actually creating a shim. And again, you can get better steps as you see, as you look at the videos. Okay, and various locks that that works with. There's also something called bump key. There's a lot of information out there on bump keys as well. You can see how this is very accessible for purchase. Bump locks. Talking about how that works. Now adding a little bit more, just basically how to lockpick. It just goes on and on. If I force it into a video format, YouTube, one after another. You may feel a little less secure after this. So basically, I think the videos would be your best bet if you wanted to get more detailed information on how to go about this. But the reality is lockpicking is not necessarily a difficult craft. It can take some practice. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Now, all different techniques of lockpicking, so I'll move past these. Okay, drop in the pin. So again, each lock is can be quite different than another type of lock, and you would basically study the different types of locks and figure out which technique would be the best. And I would consider looking at some of the videos, some of the instructional information out there. There is an unbelievable amount of information on lockpicking. There's the raking they were talking about, we saw on some of the websites. This can be difficult, but obviously the more you practice, the quicker you can be. Talking about raking, basically use a pick to rake back and forth over the pins while you adjust the amount of torque on the plug. Run the rake over all the pins with the pressure that is great enough to overcome the friction force, but not great enough to force the key pin into the hole. The bump key is pretty popular as well. At the same time, you want to watch what you actually use. You don't want to use something that would damage the lock. So a lot of information out there. Showing the Tommy Hawk there. Now, a lot of times when you look at a bump key, it looks undercut. That's typical. They put it cut all notches to the deepest biting level. And you can, again, purchase this. Here's the idea of shimming door locks. Although I think most locks these days, most doors are trying to be resistant to the people trying to use a shimming technique. So it cannot be done on most doors, as a door frame is designed to prevent this. Padlocks. Locks come in all kinds of different types. Some more resistant than others. So again, this is pickable as well. Lots of locks can be bypassed by inserting a tool manipulating the locking bolt. And continues. And the shim, that's what I showed you with the website showing the combination locks, the ones you might see on a school locker, actually using shims, which can be made out of a Coke can or any brand you want. I have actually done that. I had a boat trailer and we've forgotten the combination and it worked. So it was definitely achievable. So again, transferring the energy from the needle into the pins. The top pin is separated from the bottom, and then the gap that is created spans the shear line and the lock opens. Again, there are locks that are more resistant, and you can pay more money for those. The swipe card entry systems are considered much more secure, and obviously keypad combination locks are really more resistant as well. Now, getting away from lock picking, we have something called Metasploit. Metasploit has changed quite a bit through the years. It's called Metasploit Framework, and what this is actually something you'll find built into Backtrack as well as Kali Linux, most popular in the Linux world. And it's considered open source, and we use it for developing, testing, and using exploit tools. Now, we're also going to be looking a little bit later at Core Impact, and those are commercial offerings, Canvas and Core Securities Technologies, Core Impact. And the Metasploit project, the framework part, was written by a Ruby programming language and has components written in C language as well as assembler language. So it's got a lot of features. It can be done in Windows, although I think there's more of a tendency when you do vulnerability assessments and penetration testing to use Linux platforms. Several years back, I would have said Backtrack. Actually, even probably 4 months ago, I would have said Backtrack. But Kali seems to be taking over. If you do some research on the Linux distributions, you will find that even though that's not going to be pushed here, but I'm going to show you a little bit about it, that there is something called Kali Linux. Okay. Now, if we went up and looked at Backtrack Linux, and you went out there and said, oh, let's go get Backtrack, it will let us know that it's outdated and no longer supported, and we should go get Kali instead. So then we go, okay, let's do that. And we go look at Kali Linux, and with this, we see that it's essentially a replacement for Backtrack. It still has a great tool set. It's an improvement. You can still use it as a live CD, which means you could boot off of it and not even install it. Or you could use it as a virtualized system with something like VMware would be a possibility. And you're saying, why am I covering Kali Linux right now? Because Kali Linux includes Metasploit. And when you go to Metasploit, I mean, you could go download it, but it's actually already built into Kali, so that would be a really good choice. And they do come out, when it comes to Metasploit, with different varieties. We have Metasploit for people that are kind of new to it. And of course, so if you're used to Framework, and they have that for those, and that version for those people. There's one called exploit developers. If you're going to actually write the exploits, maybe you're a programmer at heart. Okay. Now I'm working with VMware, and I did go ahead and set some of this up in the Backtrack world because it's having a little trouble with my Kali. But it works basically the same. And a couple things. Actually, what I have on the screen right now is the kind of a graphical version of the Metasploit. It's called Armitage. And it's really friendly. You just type in Armitage to start it from a terminal. That would be one way to go about it. I've already gone ahead and done some of the steps. And I basically had the system basically do a scan. And I had it try to find the systems on my network. And of course, there's options with it. I could right-click and say services. I could right-click and say scan. So it is a nice little setup. Do another scan, right-click, operating system. Let's see, services. We'll do services. That happens to be the Mac system, or supposed to be the Mac system. One of the Mac systems or Apple systems, actually iOS. That could be an iPad or one of my other Apple devices floating around here. See, services. Pretty easy interface. Pretty neat, huh? That actually is Metasploitable Linux. This should be my default gateway. The router. So I haven't tracked down all these systems, but really friendly interface. And it is also goes well beyond this, because it is a graphical version of Metasploit called Armitage. Concerning Metasploit, I'm using VMware Workstation on my machine. I have various virtual images, as you can see on the screen. I'm using Backtrack, which is the prior version of Kali. Again, I have a little trouble with my Kali, so Backtrack will be great for this demonstration. I have a target called Metasploitable Linux. Metasploitable Linux is out there as a VMware image that's designed to be highly vulnerable, so it's really good for example's sake. Now with the Armitage, I could have continued with that graphical interface to go ahead and do exploits from the graphical interface. Now that we have already discovered the systems. Now I have closed that window, so what I've done is to demonstrate more of the command line version. I went to a terminal window and typed in MSF console, and it presented all of this on the screen. Looks kind of neat. And then I typed in show options, which gave me some information here. And I set my target, my remote host, as my Metasploitable Linux system, which happens to be 192.168.1.111. And I did some research and put together an exploit that should work to give us basically a shell prompt on the target system. So with Metasploit, you will find that the command line interface, or basically this interface, you will be typing in everything by hand, and of course you'd have to know which exploits work on which systems, and sometimes it's hit and miss. But this one it looked into, and this would give us a backdoor, or basically a command shell. So we pointed it to the target system, which is a Metasploitable Linux, so anything I do should go toward that system. So use exploit Unix IRC, Internet Relay Chat, and it's working with a backdoor for that. And once we type in the particular exploit, we type in exploit, and it tries to make a connection to give us a shell prompt. Okay, it tells me that a command shell session 1 has been opened on the system, and it doesn't look like I have anything. But yet I can do a directory listing with ls. I can find out what my current working directory is. Basically, any command I want to is if I was at a shell prompt sitting there on Metasploitable Linux, because I am. And then I can Control-C and abort that session. And that's a concept of doing exploits. The exploit was designed to give me a command shell so I am on my target system. And again, some of these exploits, you will try various exploits, and it depends on the version of the target and how vulnerable they are, whether they will be actually successful. So it's a really powerful tool, something to consider. It's been around for quite a while. It's come a long way, really. So basically, I just kind of tried to show you a little bit of a demo. And I did the show exploits. Actually, I don't think I showed you that one, but show exploits, and I had a particular exploit in mind. So let me go back to that for a second. Actually, I'll try to make it more fair. Kind of start over. Because this is how I started in the very beginning, which was the MSF console. Close that terminal. Close that one, get it out of the way. Here we are. Kind of hanging for some reason. There it is, just being really super duper slow. I don't know why. But basically, I'm used to it waiting quite so long. Finally, when I did show exploits, it just started showing all the exploits, because there's quite a few. Now, if I've already done my research on the exploits, then I wouldn't necessarily have to show all the exploits. I had some particular exploit in mind, but that is the idea of Metasploit. It's really good for, vulnerability assessment, more penetration testing than anything. It doesn't look like this anymore, but the interface is always changing, of course. All right. Another product is called Saint Exploit. Actually, there's a product called Saint, and it is a vulnerability assessment tool, but yet inside of that tool set, there is an exploit module, and it is called Saint Exploit. So instead of just leaving it at the vulnerability side, which you would do with tools like Nessus, again, Saint, GFI LandGuard, so a whole lot of different tools, Saint happens to have this exploit module built into it, so not only can it find your vulnerabilities, it's also able to continue on and look for, actually try to pen test it, to automatically do some of the penetration testing. And what's interesting about Saint is it does have a graphical interface. It is Linux-based. That's the one most people would use. It's very Linux-based, but yet it is very graphical. So extremely friendly. And with this exploit module, you effectively have automatic penetration testing at a lesser price. As you go out there and do a little looking here, you can then go say Saint, vulnerability scanner. Let's at least get as close. Get to the company's website, and of course they offer different pricing, but it does have, the penetration side to it, the exploit module built into it. So they have a lot of different products. Those two, so if I can get you a screenshot. I mean, that's what it looks like. Really graphical. So you can see there's really nothing unfriendly about it. There's Saint Exploit. Find your targets, and then of course you can click on the pictures to tell it what you're trying to do, command prompt, file manager, screen capture, whatever you're really interested in accomplishing. So really kind of nice. Just showing off the interface of Saint Exploit. With these type tool sets, there is a charge for purchase and of course a yearly type maintenance charge. Another really fantastic product is Core Impact. But again, this one's quite expensive. I've not price checked it lately, but I've heard around $25,000. It can be pretty expensive. And this is kind of like, I guess in my mind, the cream of the crop. And if you have the money for it, that's the catch. Most people can't buy products like this. They would hesitate on even buying products like Nessus and Saint. Because with those, there's still, a pretty good fee there. So sometimes companies will actually elect to hire somebody to come in and do the penetration test, and that way they're just paying for the test and not having to buy the product and then have the people of their own people doing the test. They have a third party who has no particular interest in hiding anything within, the company and maybe some of their insecurities. So they call it rapid penetration test, step-by-step automation of penetration testing. You can see the steps there: information gathering, attack and penetration, local information gathering, privilege escalation, cleanup, and report generation. These various products tend to end up with a report. And the report is what we call our deliverable. And that's what we would give to the customer. We were hired to come in and do a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. Remember, the vulnerability assessment part, again, is just looking for the vulnerabilities, and you may give them a report on that. But if you follow through with the penetration test, you're actually trying to exploit those vulnerabilities. You're playing ethical hacker, but this is just a wonderful tool, but quite expensive. Okay. So in this chapter, we looked at the fact that security is not just, I started thinking about hackers and dealing with them. It's not just their fantastic ways of breaking into your system as far as through software or some insecurity in your firewall. There is the physical side. And then if someone were to socially engineer their way by pretending to be the fire inspection person, then, or the telephone guy that needs to come and do the repair on your telephone systems, then you may let them in areas that if they know how to lockpick, they might keep going. So there's a lot to be looked at when it comes to lockpicking, and the chapter gave you the core basics of lockpicking, but I still think those, when you start looking at various videos and some of the various sites that sell the lockpicking equipment, they have some really good detailed information. The videos are quite informative. Remember, Metasploit Project is built in to Linux. Well, built into specifically Kali and Backtrack Linux, not necessarily all Linux distributions. The Kali and the Backtrack were designed for vulnerability penetration testing, so it makes sense that it would be built in. Saint Exploit was just an example of a tool set that has penetration testing automated within it. And Core Impact is like the really super nice one, but quite expensive.